A dire warning about our home, planet Earth. Experts say our planet only has a few years before the effects of climate change become obvious, and even obvious to the doubters. Now to a dire warning about climate change. According to a new report, experts say that we have until 2030 to avoid catastrophe. It also says that if unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet that we all share. The report focuses on what could happen if global temperatures rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. CNN meteorologist Ivan Cabrera is in the International Weather Center following the details of this dire report. Ivan.
It is dire. They're always dire. I mean, when you're talking about climate change here, it's really not going to be any good news. George, I think we've passed the event horizon in that if we were to stop emissions today, we went to zero, we would still be in a heap of trouble.
Dire warning from United Nations board. They say the world has barely 10 years to get climate change under control, or the results could be catastrophic. A new report says the planet is already 2/3 of the way to a climate tipping point. The panel says if we don't reduce greenhouse emissions, the Earth will reach that crucial threshold as early as 2030.
Sea levels would rise an extra 4 inches, and extreme heat and weather events would be much worse and more frequent. Holding global warming below this limit would require what the panel calls rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. The U.S. is the world's second-largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and the Trump administration has rolled back Obama-era climate measures.
Scientists with the United Nations issuing a stark warning. The world has about a decade to get climate change under control, or the results could be catastrophic. They say the world needs to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by the year 2030, or risk reaching a crucial threshold that will lead to extreme drought, wildfires, floods, and food shortages for hundreds of millions of people. Now, the U.S. is the world's second largest emitter of carbon dioxide. Since President Trump took office, his administration has rolled back Obama-era climate measures and pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord.
A stark warning from nearly 100 scientists across the globe this morning. We have a little over a decade to avoid catastrophic climate change, or there will be severe worldwide consequences. An international call for immediate and unprecedented action to avoid catastrophic climate change. 91 scientists from 40 countries have compiled this landmark study for the United Nations, and it has found that we have just over 11 years to get climate change under control in order to avoid catastrophic flooding, devastating droughts, and the mass extinction of animals across the globe. With us now, one of the authors of the report, also professor of climate science at Duke University, Dr. Drew Shindle. The numbers are stunning. The price tag of $54 trillion if we don't do something about this is stunning. The loss of life, of animal species is stunning. But for so many Americans that I think have become numb to issues of climate change, what should they take away from this report this morning?
Well, I think they should really understand that we're already seeing these effects. You know, we just heard about the latest hurricane. Hurricane Florence just battered my state. These are the kind of things that we're already seeing, and they're going to keep getting worse.
A new report on climate change warns of dire consequences as soon as 2040, written by 91 scientists from 40 countries. The UN report concludes if greenhouse gases and emissions continue to rise at current rates, the atmosphere will be warmed by 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit compared to pre-industrial levels in just 20 years. So not only does the U.S. seem unwilling to tackle the suggested changes required, but when you take into consideration that Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords, we are actively rolling back protections that were already in place.
That's right. I mean, you know, this is something that makes this challenge that these UN scientists laid out that much tougher. You know, they're sending a pretty clear message here that in the next decade or so, the world really, truly has to get its act together to stave off some of the worst effects of climate change. We as a country, and quite frankly other countries, just clearly aren't making those transformational changes quick enough.
An alarming new report today from 91 scientists on a key UN panel on climate change details how the rise of greenhouse gas emissions at their current rates could warm the Earth over the coming decades and trigger severe consequences. Joining me now is NBC Chief Environmental Affairs Correspondent Ann Thompson. And we knew this was coming, but this lays it out in black and white.
Yeah, and it says that time's up, Andrea, that the world has to do something to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. You'll note that in the report it talks about that 2.7 degree Fahrenheit threshold, and the IPCC says we're going to reach that somewhere between 2030 and mid-century. So we have to take action now if we are to stem the worst impacts of climate change. So it's a big, big task of the world's politicians. They say it's scientifically possible. The question is the political will there?
And certainly not from this White House,
No.
because they've gone exactly in the opposite direction.
Well, scientists say climate change is getting worse, and there could be serious consequences for our planet in the next 20 years. The new report from the UN predicts that at the current warming rate, millions more people will die from extreme heat by the year 2040. There will also be substantial loss of coral reefs and a rise of sea levels that could wipe out small island nations like the Bahamas and the Maldives. More than 90 scientists from 40 countries wrote the 728-page report. Samini Sengupta is the international climate reporter for the New York Times, and she's joining us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
You know, it's startling. You look at these numbers just by 2040, the devastating effects that we'll already see within our own lifetimes and obviously our children's. How did scientists come to this conclusion?
Yeah, 2040 is exactly the year to keep in mind. A child born today will just be graduating from college in 2040. My own daughter will be in her early 30s in 2040. They came to this conclusion by looking at piles and piles of scientific studies. And they concluded that we are warming up the planet by human activity, by everything that we do, so fast that we're reaching the cliff edge a little faster, quite a bit faster.
So most of these wounds are self-inflicted by us. What are we doing?
A new report by the UN carries a stark warning. The world has little more than a decade to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere, or it may be too late to reverse the worst effects of climate change. Here's Mark Phillips.
The future is closer than we think and is not good unless we do something about it, according to the latest United Nations report on climate change. Most climate scientists think we're already beginning to see the extreme consequences of a warming world. Severe storms, sea level rise and flooding in the Philippines and on the U.S. East Coast. Other consequences, crop failure and mass population movement, may also reach crisis levels in the next 20 years or so. All this will happen sooner than previously feared by the year 2030, the report says, if greenhouse gas emissions continue at current rates and global temperatures rise 2.7 degrees above what they were in pre-industrial times.